Hi everybody. My name is Thalmann, and I'm a PhD student at Oregon State University. Hello. Today I'm going to talk about the marine heatwaves on the diet and growing Pacific Cod in the Gulf of Alaska. And this follows up with Dr. Savana's talk really well because of how many changes we've seen in Alaska in the last couple of years. In the Gulf of Alaska, there were two extreme marine wave events in the last decade that led to increases of about 3 degrees Celsius of the water temperature in the region. So this graphic showing the temperature in the Gulf of Alaska in 2014 and 2019, which was the beginning year of those heat waves. And those areas that are dark red are those areas where the surface temperature was 3 degrees above the climate normal. And in this region, that's a big increase in temperature, and it led to declines in seabirds and marine mammals, dramatic declines in forage fish species, and a restructuring of drowned fish species in the region. And one of the species that was particularly impacted by these heat waves was the Gulf of Alaska Pacific Cod, which is an important commercial fishery in the region. And this species declined by about 75% in response to these marine heat wave events. Here's a graphic of the Juvenile Pacific Cod catch breeding effort across the last 4 years. And you can see that although it fluctuates between the years, during the marine heat waves, it was consistently very low. And this big decline in abundance led to the closure of the feral Gulf of Alaska fishery in 2020 for the first time ever. So these juvenile Pacific cod live in coastal nursery habitats near shore on the Alaska Peninsula. And even in these coastal habitats, temperatures were about 30% higher than normal. So this is temperature oscillations from 2006 to 2021 in a bay close to Kodia Island, Alaska. And you can see that in these years 2014, 15, 16, and 2019, those temperatures were a lot higher than the average for this area. Those years were classified as heat wave years. And for the sake of the analysis I'm about to present, we took each of these years and categorized them either as years, as years before the heat wave from 2006 to 2013, or years between heat waves in 2017 and 2018. We classified the between heat wave years differently than before heat wave years. Because the water temperatures were still a little warmer and the fish were being a little normal, as you'll see a little later on. So the objectives for the talk that I'm going to do today are to look at how juvenile Pacific diet composition changed before, during, and between the heat waves. We're going to accomplish that with stomach contents analysis. And also how juvenile Pacific cod nursery growth changes with these heat waves. And we're going to accomplish that with analysis. So we collected juvenile Pacific cod from 2006 to 2019 in July and August on Kodia Island, Alaska. And these cod are from the NOAA Alaska Science Center Fisheries Epidemiology Program. And we took all of these samples back to the lab and dissected out the stomachs and the lists for our analysis. But before I dive too deep into the analysis, I wanted to give just a shot of what these cod looked like across these 14 years. So this is the standard length of the juvenile Pacific cod in July and August 2006 to 2019. I want you to note that not only are the fish bigger in heat wave years, but there's also a big jump in size between July and August for these fish. So they increase in size a lot more in that 1 month than normal. Juvenile Pacific cod are generalist soapers predators at this age, which means they feed on things like amphipods and pods. So when we did our stomach contents analysis, we identified these prey groups here, and then we took all that diet data and converted it into an index of relative importance. And this is a useful metric for diet data to take into account both the counts and the weights of the data. So I'm going to show you the results of this diet analysis in July and August. I'm going to show you July first. So this is a mosaic of diet composition by percent prey index of relative importance, our time series for July. And we see that diet composition varied moderately in this year. And one of the species that was really important in those warmer years were mysid shrimps. They're a little bit bigger than the item I'd normally consume in July. We're going to take the same data and we're going to convert it into a non-metric multidimensional scaling ordination to better visualize our patterns. For those of you who aren't familiar with this type of analysis, essentially taking highly dimensional diet data, crossing it into only a few dimensions to better see the patterns. So each of these dots here is an individual cod stomach and prey species. And the closer the dots are, the more they are, the further apart they are, the more different. So this is that same graph. Now I've colored it by regime, so that heat waves are in red, the waves are in blue. In between heat waves are in gray, with 95% confidence speeds. And what you can see is that there is some separation in diets, particularly in those warm years, and those large mysids and amphipods seem to be contributing to some of those separations. But remember that the fish are also bigger in these warm years. So if we overlay the same plot with size contours of the Pacific cod, and they're increasing from right to left on this graph, you can see that the bigger cod are associated with these diets and the bigger prey items. So by August, these patterns are even more clear than they were in July. Here's a mosaic plot for August. We can see that once again those shrimp are more common in years, and so are bigger prey items like polychaetes and shrimps. And if we look at this as an ordination, you can see a really clear separation of the diets in the years compared to the diet for the heat waves. And those between diets share characteristics of both the heat wave years and the years before the heat waves. Once again, those bigger prey items, the mysids and polychaetes, seem to be driving some of those differences that we find in diets in warm years. Again, if we overlay Pacific cod size, now it's increasing right to left. Those bigger cod are associated with warmer conditions and those bigger prey items. So some takeaways from the diet piece of this analysis. Juvenile Pacific cod size and the water influence patterns in diet common during waves. And the Pacific cod consumed different prey in heat wave conditions. They tended to be larger than their normal. And in fact, the July cod in a heat wave year was consuming prey that looked a lot like August prey in a cool year. Our second objective is to look at how Pacific cod growth changed in nursery during these heat wave years. So we accomplished this with a Otolith analysis. Otoliths are calcium carbonate structures in the inner air of fishes. Look like this. They're useful for analyzing growth because when you polish them and section them, you get something that looks like this. And each of those lines represents a fish's growth, similar to a tray. And you can measure the daily growth by measuring the distance in between those movements, and then back calculating that to get an increase in the fish's size per day. Because we're just looking at the nursery growth, we're just going to look at the final 3 weeks of nursery growth at the edge of the OLR. So what we see is that growth was a lot higher in warmer conditions. So here is July and August growth trajectory, growth in millimeters on the y-axis. And then on the x-axis, we have growth 3 weeks prior at increment number 0, and then growth at the last day of the fish's life at increment 21. And again, gray is between heat waves, heat waves is before heat waves with 95% confidence. And we can see that growth is a lot higher in years between heat waves and in years during the heat waves. The slowest growth is in those cooler years before the heat waves. So this growth analysis is still ongoing, but some initial conclusions are that they are growing faster in these warmer conditions. So there's a couple hypotheses for why we might be seeing patterns in the diet and the growth that we are seeing. And that is in stressful conditions such as a marine heat wave, Pacific cod have high mortality at early life stages. There's evidence, in fact, that eggs only hatch in a very narrow temperature window of 4 to 6 degrees Celsius. So in those warm conditions, that's suitable spawning habitat was reduced. There were fewer eggs, fewer larvae, and fewer juveniles. Juveniles that did make it to life stage tended to be the bigger and faster growing. In addition, there's evidence that these cod spawned earlier in the year in heat wave conditions. This is coming out of the postdoc lab with the same data set that I showed you. And these cod in cool conditions really spawn in April. And then in heat wave conditions, spawn about 2 weeks earlier. And those years between the heat waves spawn almost a full month earlier than normal. These fish are older and growing faster, and those both are likely contribute to large size. But it's also important to note that trends in diet common growth that I've been showing you are impacted by both the size of the fish and the water temperature. And it's difficult to tease apart those two effects. This is size sensitive distributions for July and August before, between, and during heat waves. And what I want you to note is that there is not a lot of different size in these fish. Smaller fish tend to be exclusively by August in those cooler years. Larger fish tend to be in the heat wave years. That's something that we need to work on our analysis, and something that should be taken into mind in interpreting our results. With that, I'd like to thank undergrads for helping data processing, Thomas Murphy and Zoe Almeida, Otoliths analysis, the NOAA LMR COC program funding this work, and the Ben Laura Lab Group at the NOAA Science Center for sample mentorship and support. Thank you. Thank you.
So, great work, great talk. I'm a PhD director in heatwave specific, so I know how difficult it can be. Did you? A lot of my work was on observations versus gelatinous content. Did you notice any increase in gelatinous consumption?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Pacific cod usually aren't gelatinous consumers, but there's evidence with the steelhead that they did increase their consumption of gelatinous predators. And pyrosomes were one that was a really common. They look like sea cucumbers, tunicate. They showed up in really high numbers, and they were eaten by the salmon and likely by larger life stages of cod. We just don't have that data, but in this life stage, no, we did not. Thanks.
Are there any refuge zones that the juveniles utilize which can be protected for them so that would increase the population size in the future?
That's a really for a lot of species, they migrate and warmer zones. There's some evidence with cod that they're moving northward to get where refuge. The problem with the Gulf of Alaska is there's not long arm, and that supports movement between the Gulf of Alaska and the Bering Sea. I think the fish would like to move north, and they can move around, but it's hard to escape those warm periods.
John, I was wondering, when you do your climate analyses, is it all taxonomy, or do you also have to use other techniques? Because it's like what it like.
So that's a really good question. When we open taxonomics, we have to deal with actually digesting, which can be tricky to identify. But yes, we just use taxonomy. Make sure that we were getting correct identifications not in the taxonomic groups. So we instead of going all the way to species, we just left it at amphipod or copepod. Thank you.